My favorite professor in college was this guy named Dr. Martin. He always wore a full suit. Often, he wore a vest with the suit and had the carnation. Nearly every day, he had a carnation with the suit. I had professors that would come to college in jeans and a sweatshirt, not Dr. Martin. He dressed for success. He also had this hair that I think he had so much gel in his hair that if you lit anything close to it, he would have set the whole damn building on fire. But that's beside the point. I love Dr. Martin because he taught me a ton about life. And it's funny, he was actually a professor in 20th century American literature. And one thing he said, the main point Dr. Martin had was that there's this unifying thesis about great literature throughout time. And everything in literature, the unifying thing about literature, it's based on the second law of thermodynamics. Tell second law of thermodynamics, Joe. Second law of thermodynamics says things are falling apart. It's the rule of entropy. Things naturally, this table, this podcast, this microphone, me, we're all falling apart. And the hero in each of these stories is just trying to hold it together. Maybe we can hold it together, and maybe we could even get ahead, right? And if that has a little bit to do with our life, don't you think that also has something to do with our money? Live from the 3-room apartment above Uncle Jack's garage while the basement's being renovated. Hey there, Stackers. I'm Joe Saul-Sehy, Average Joe Money on Twitter. And what a show we have for you today. We have not one, but 2 headlines ripped from the press. One today financial, one not financial. And as an extra bonus, not only do we read them, we actually comment on each of these, telling you what they have to maybe do with your money. And that's the show called Money in the Morning. But wait, there's more. You sitting down? On top of that, at the end of the show, we also take the 2 headlines and we send you home with something called the big idea, unifying these 2 headlines, which at first glance seem to have nothing in common. Today's show is brought to you by Tiller. You know, if you're somebody who is a spreadsheet money nerd, or you're more like me, you just want to press the easy button and track because you're flying, doing other things, 90 miles an hour, Tiller's got you covered either way. Because it's based on spreadsheets, it can be as easy or as complicated as you want. We'll get more about that later in the show. But for now, if you want to take a look, check it out, see what's under the hood, stackybenjamins.com/Tiller gets you to Tiller and more. All right. We've got a fun show for you today. You've got stuff to do. So, Laura, why don't you get this thing kicked off?
Here come 2 headlines ripped from the financial press, only at Money in the Morning.
Our friend Jim Wang from Wallet Hacks is here in our live studio audience, our live Facebook audience. And he says we get a point for using the second law of thermodynamics in the video. If you're playing, Jim, if you're playing the at-home game, you just, you got near the center square there. I had to get that in. So you're welcome. Anything I can do. Our first headline comes to us from Cnbc. How to avoid hidden retirement fees. Oh, this is fun. This is written by Sharon Epperson and Jessica Dickler. And guess what? We haven't done this for a while, guys. Ladies and gentlemen, we have
the dumbest headline of the week.
Oh, yeah. Dumbest headline. How to avoid hidden retirement fees. We'll talk about why this is dumb. This is beyond dumb. When it comes to saving for retirement, the piece says every little bit helps. That's why it's important to keep a careful eye on the fees you're coughing up for your mutual and exchange traded funds, which take a huge toll on potential investment returns over time. The good news is that fund fees are on the decline. Overall, average fees fell by 8% in 2017, the biggest decline ever notched in 1 year, according to a study by Morningstar. Earlier this month, Fidelity became the first fund company to offer index funds without any management fee. Other major index fund companies and discount brokers, including Vanguard Group and Charles Schwab, have been competitively lowering their fees as well. The bad news is many investors don't realize how much they're paying in fund fees in the first place, or how much these expenses and other investments are eating into their retirement savings. Just as you're focused on the compound growth that you're getting from your investment returns year after year, the fees that you're paying on those investments are also compounded. Taken together, you could be paying 2% or more in fees. While 2% still sounds like a small percentage, it's misleading, according to Josh Robbins, Chief Strategy Officer at America's Best 401k. Take two investors, for example, one who's paying 1% in fees, another is paying 2%. Person with the 2% in fees will run out of money 10 years sooner than the person with 1% in fees, Robbins said. To see if your fees are too high, check the fee disclosure and look at the expense ratios on the mutual funds you're invested in. Christine Benz, Director of Personal Finance at Morningstar, suggests considering a lower fee mutual fund if you have several funds in your 401k that have an expense ratio over 1%. Keep in mind that fees may also be related to how much advice you're getting. An actively managed fund will cost more than an index fund or ETF, and alternatively, a robo-advisor will be cheaper than a human advisor. In the end, however, a fund's expense ratio should not be the only reason that an investor chooses a particular portfolio, Ben says. Quote, the emotional component is the benefit of working with a human advisor, she said. You get someone who knows your personal situation and can reach out to you on a day when the market is tumbling. All seems to make sense, doesn't it? And yet, I called it
The dumbest headline of the week.
Yes, it is. And we're not that far into the week. And yet it's the dumbest headline of the week. So why is it dumb, Joe? Well, first of all, fees are an important part of your, let's talk about why it's not dumb. Fees are an important part of your savings. You should know the fees in your funds. You should get a handle on your fees and understand that the different ways that you might buy funds. If you buy a fund through a broker, you might pay a fee to buy the fund. You might pay a fee to sell it. And then what they talk about in this piece, you might pay an internal management cost. It's this ongoing leech on your funds that siphons money away from your pocket and into other people's pockets. I get all that. Fantastic advice. Great idea. The bad news is, though, is what this does to people. And I'll tell you what it does. First, look, I don't know where to start. Let's start with this idea of human advisor versus robo-advisor. If your human advisor is doing the same thing that a robo-advisor does, you've got the wrong advisor. A robo-advisor does nothing. I mean, let's get clear about this. They do so little that M1 Finance, this fintech brokerage firm in Chicago, does everything a robo does for free now. They made their fee free. What they do is important, but it's not what an advisor does. So when I read hire a robo versus hire a human, are you kidding me? And then the second thing, when I see a 2% fee juxtaposed against a 1% fee, and they say your money drains 10 years earlier, yes, it does. It absolutely does. But I'll tell you this, if that extra 1% comes with a coach that stops you from mucking it up for yourself, because that's what we do, isn't it? We screw up our money over and over and over. We don't save nearly enough money. We don't even look for savings. We do this very, very logical job at work. And then we go home and what do? We make emotional decisions about our cash. That's when the human advisor and their additional fee comes into play. And if they're good at what they do, guess what? You actually save tons more money that you wouldn't have saved. You actually put that money into an asset allocation plan that makes sense for you, AKA the robo gets close to that one piece. You also make sure that when you pass away, your money goes to the right people. If you don't pass away and you're disabled, that you have a strategy around risk management. You've got your debt taken care of. You've got your budget in order. You've got milestones set up toward your goals. And because of this dumb piece, people are going to focus on the thing that ever since I joined the financial media cadre, 8 years ago, all I read about is fees. Reduce your fee. And then in our Facebook group, on other people's Facebook group, all I read about is fee. It's easy, it's sexy, and it's dumb. A lot of people are going to low fee themselves into oblivion. They're never going to get anything because they never had any coaches. They never had anybody pushing them, and they never pushed themselves to do better. And they stayed emotional about their money. Man, I got ranty, didn't I? How about that? And because of that, our Facebook audience is very quiet on this one. Like, I don't want to disagree with Joe on that. Seems like he needs his coffee. I might agree. That's our first headline today. Let's say hi, by the way, to everybody who's here. I talked about our friend Jim, who's here. Our friend Susan's here. Amika's here. He just met Phil Town. And Phil Town's a great guy. We were having a discussion before we started this podcast about our friend Phil and his Invest Ed podcast. Good stuff. Our friend Karen's here. Karen, the star of two shows ago. Karen was the star, held the show up. Sophia's here from Uruguay. We've got Sydney here. James is here. Nice group, quiet group today. Let's move on to the second piece then. Second piece comes to us from Bloomberg. This is written by Riley Griffin. After 60 years, I-95 is complete. How about this one, Jim? As if Second Law of Thermodynamics wasn't enough. How about if I do something about infrastructure, huh? Once again, you're welcome. Across the U.S., public infrastructure is crumbling because of legislative gridlock, this piece says, and chronic underfunding. Roads are overcrowded, bridges are well past their expiration date, and transit systems regularly face unprecedented delays. But there'll be one thing to celebrate as you see the beach traffic this weekend. A small, strange gap in I-95 is being filled. Come September, one of the most audacious public infrastructure projects in U.S. history will be completed after more than 6 decades of work. Interstate 95 was the crown jewel of the American highway system, championed by President Dwight Eisenhower. And yet, the plan for an artery stretching the length of the East Coast almost didn't happen because of local lawmakers and landowners in Mercer County, New Jersey. Near the Pennsylvania border, drivers have long been forced off the interstate and onto other roadways, only to join back 8 miles away. Transportation officials and civil engineers spent more than 2 decades and $425 million to eliminate this detour off I-95, the most traveled highway in America, spanning 1,900 miles from Maine to Miami. Pennsylvania Turnpike Commission, which oversees the I-95 interchange project, said the new infrastructure, which includes the creation of flyover ramps, toll plaza facilities, environmental mitigation sites, intersections, 6 overhead bridges, widened highways, and new connections to the New Jersey and Pennsylvania turnpikes, will be open to the public by September 24th. Quote, the benefit of completing this missing link is mobility, said Carl DeFabo, the director of public relations at the Pennsylvania Turnpike Commission. The new infrastructure will reduce traffic time for north and southbound travelers and ease congestion on local roads that used to connect I-95 to the Pennsylvania Turnpike. I-95 will be the last infrastructure project financed by Eisenhower's 1956 National Interstate and Defense Highways Act. The legislation authorized $25 billion, roughly $230 billion in 2018 dollars, for the construction of 40,000 miles of the interstate highway system. At the time, the act marked the largest public works project in American history. And the piece goes on from there. It is fantastic that this finally got done. And what the heck does this have to do with your money? I love the fact, love it, that this was a big, hairy, audacious thing that they decided to do back in the Eisenhower administration. I mean, imagine this. At that time, we have no interstate highway system. The main goal, I understand, is that they wanted quicker troop movement from coast to coast. They wanted the ability for the military to move quickly, but they could make it available for everybody. And so the ability to move commerce across this huge country meant that we needed better roads. And so they created this infrastructure. They created this highway system. But imagine that at that time, none of it's built. It's this huge funding project. And then, oh, by the way, and I don't know if they knew it was going to take 60 years, but oh, by the way, this is going to last for a long time. Like, you'd imagine the people that were in charge of this project, maybe in their 50s then, those people are probably gone now. Probably almost all gone. The people that planned this, a goal beyond their lifetime. and it's finished. And what's cool about that, and what the link is, I think, to personal finance, is that when you make these big goals, like, I got a to-do list every stinking day. I woke up today, I have a to-do list. I talked to my coach. We went through all the things I have to do before I go on vacation in 10 days. And it's funny, I have a 10-day thing, but the 10-day piece really isn't important. We have these much bigger milestones, these 10-year milestones, these 20-year milestones of where we want to be in the future. Those are the powerful ones, right? These big goals. And yet when I'd sit down with people, they'd never really thought about the big goal. Like, well, I got this job. I'm hoping for a 3% raise. Really? Your whole goal in life is to get a 3% raise? Like, when did we become that person? Where did we remember when you were in kindergarten? And in kindergarten, you wanted to be the president or a firefighter or a dancer or something. You had these big, huge goals. And now you're whatever age you are, and you're hoping that when your boss talks to you next time, it's a 3% raise. Let's go back to the big goals. I love this idea, the interstate system. Let's make the interstate system. Now, that's takeaway number one from this. There's another takeaway on this piece. Hear about how this infrastructure is starting to crumble? Maintenance, right? That's where this ongoing meeting comes on. Second law of thermodynamics. Stuff falling apart. Got to keep working at putting it back together. Keep Humpty Dumpty together while you're building for growth. And I think that's our second takeaway today. Hey, in just a second, we're going to have the big idea today. And that's a piece of the show where we take number one, this idea of the interstate system. And how the heck are we going to pair that? How are we going to pair that with our first takeaway today, hidden retirement fees? We're going to do that in just a second. But first, let's talk a little bit about Tiller. I said I would mention earlier why having a spreadsheet as the backbone of Tiller is why it works for everybody. Because a lot of people, if you're in my camp, listen, spreadsheet, no thanks. Eyes glaze over. I want nothing to do with it. I was working on spreadsheets this morning. Necessary evil, I think, the spreadsheet. But I still use them. But what's cool about Tiller is you don't even know you're using a spreadsheet if you like things done easily, because of the fact that they've got a series of templates that you can go from that are pre-built, and you can stop right there. Now, that wasn't simple enough for me, but because it's based on Google Docs, Google Sheets, or on Excel, you choose which one you like better, your platform of choice. Because that's the infrastructure, I can combine asset classes. I can combine different budget topics. I can make it super easy for myself with just a few clicks of the button. And all of a sudden, instead of having to deal with the off-the-shelf software everybody else is using, I'm using the thing that's created just for me. On the other side, mom is a spreadsheet geek, and she likes charts, graphs, seeing where every dollar is. And for you, it's the same thing. You don't have to use a template. And the best part of Tiller, no matter how you spend money, where you bank, what your place is that you hold your assets, you can press a button and it all downloads securely and safely into your spreadsheet. No more going from site to site, just filling it in because you want to have a spreadsheet instead of that off-the-shelf software. It's called Tiller. We absolutely love it. stackingbenjamins.com/Tiller gets you there. And that's the way that you support the show, is that if you like Tiller and you use our link, they send us a thank you for referring you to them. So thanks to everybody who's used Tiller, likes it, and used our link. All right, let's bring these two things together. Jim said most people need to be as passionate. Well, maybe I need some more coffee, Jim. Susan says she's always up for a Joe rant. Well, thank you. I was ranty today. Karen says, you really are an engineer at heart, but I'm so glad you do this instead. You know, what's funny, Karen? I live so far out in farm country. I didn't know what an engineer was. I seriously thought that engineers just drove the train. When I found out in college what my engineering friends were up to, and I knew then it was something different, I just really hadn't paid much attention. I thought that was for me, and I missed it. Paul says lick stamps. I don't know what Paul's talking about. Paul might have licked too many stamps before he wrote that down. And Jan says, for your personal goal, buy 100-year bonds. Imagine 100-year bonds. Talk about beyond your lifetime, Jan. So let's take these two things and let's put these together, shall we? Number one, we're talking about fees. And I called fees the dumbest headline of the week. Actually, sorry, I didn't call dumbest headline of the week. I called it
The dumbest headline of the week.
There we go. If you got the dumb sound effect, you got to use it. And then the second piece was about infrastructure and I-90, the interstate system finally being finished with the completion of I-95. Those two things put together. How do we put them together for a big idea? This is how. A great mentor I had early in my career shined a light on something. And I love the value of mentors and of taking your mentors to heart. I started this show talking about Dr. Martin, what a great mentor he was. And I do think about the second law of thermodynamics and about how things are always falling apart. The infrastructure on the interstate system is falling apart. We're trying to hold it together as we're trying to build it. We got to think about both parts of your goal, holding it together and building it out more. And every time we think about building it out more, we have to think about how are we going to maintain it, because it's going to try to fall apart the second we build it. But that's not the only mentor I had. I had another mentor who told me this rule. He said there's short-term and obvious, and there's the long-term and not so obvious. And generally speaking, the truth is where the long-term and not so obvious lives. And think about that. The short-term and obvious stuff, fees, yeah, 2% fee worse than a 1% fee. If I've got somebody who's going to teach me how to make money faster than I've ever made it before, who's going to teach me how to streamline my budget, who's going to help me live a better life, and I'm not going to pay them the 1% more because I read a dumbass article telling me that my money runs out quicker and I can't see the big picture. Short-term and obvious versus long-term and not so obvious. The question isn't which fee's higher. The question is, what do I get for it, right? Maybe. If I don't get any more, then I don't pay a higher fee. Same thing with the interstate system. Interstate system back in the 50s, these people that started this thing, and I think it's a pretty brave goal. They could have said, that's a ton of money. And yes, it was. And this isn't going to be done anytime soon. Are you crazy? Like, we're going to spend money on what? Huh? Why would we spend all this crazy money on we already have roads. There's roads all over the place. What do we need this interstate system for? And they spent the money, and 60 years later, they saw the goal through. And I think it's those big goals, those not so obvious goals, that are the big, powerful things that we can work on. The sprint is fine, but the marathon is so much sweeter. And I think that's our big takeaway today, guys. Hey, thanks everybody for playing today on Facebook. Hey, Jacob just got here. Hey, Jacob, good seeing you. Glad Jacob made the end. We'll see everybody back here next time. Go Stacks and Benjamins. Bye-bye.
Money in the Morning is created by saul-sehy and comes to your ears because of the collective genius of our producer, Richie rutter-reese, engineer, Caden Thompson, and a pack of very well-trained ferrets here in the basement. You'll find links to all of our headlines featured on today's show in Joe's Twitter feed at @AverageJoeMoney. I know you already know this too, but Money in the Morning is for entertainment purposes only, and you shouldn't act on anything recommended by a bunch of entertainers in a basement without first consulting with your financial advisor and second, having your head examined. Have a headline you'd like us to discuss? Send them to Joe at stackingbenjamins.com or put them on our Stacking Benjamins Basement closed Facebook group. This show is copyright 2018 Stacking Benjamins LLC, all rights reserved. I'm Joe's mom's neighbor, Doug, and I reserve the right to always say, we'll see you next time back here on Money in the Morning.